We're going to get into some government stuff, which is so exciting. So please welcome to the stage Matt Hancock, the UK's digital minister, Axelle Lemaire, who's the French digital minister, and James Wise of Balderton Capital, as well as our moderator, Mike Butcher.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Butcher. I'm the editor-at-large for TechCrunch based out of London. Hope you're having a great day. I gather in World War I the troops used to jump up and down to keep themselves warm and stamp their feet, so I encourage you to do that if you need to do that. We are going to be talking now about the impact of the political environment, Brexit, but also how states in Europe are attracting talent, how they're going to keep it. Because, of course, as we all know, startups are about two or three major things. One of them is money, the other is talent and access to talent. So let me introduce my panel. We have the Minister for Innovation, Axelle Lemaire, in the middle there, come over from Paris, especially for today. Very, very much welcome. Next to me is Matt Hancock, the Minister for Digital and Culture in the UK. And furthest away from me is James Wise, a partner at Balderton Capital in London. So to kick off our discussion, Balderton has actually put together some very interesting research about talent, which we're going to hear from right now. So James, if you want to kick off the show, you've got some slides you'd like to show us.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So as mentioned, I'm a partner with Balderton Capital, and while we invest across Europe, obviously a large part of our portfolio is based in the UK. And so in advance of this discussion, we asked our portfolio what concerned them most about Brexit. And while there was a long list of issues that came up, the number one thing overriding everything else was access to talent. And this makes a lot of sense. The tech community is particularly reliant on migrant workers. If you look at all of the industries within the UK, within the top 10, you see computer programming and scientific research as a percentage of migrants within their workforce. And if you were to reorder this slide by productivity per hour, you'd probably see them at the top. Now, to date, this has been good for the UK. In fact, the UK is still the #1 nation that people look to for work in tech roles outside of their home country across Europe. And that's not really changed a lot since the Brexit vote. This is the whole of 2016. And the UK has benefited massively from this. So while within the startup ecosystem as a whole in the UK, around 22% of people are non-native. If you look at companies who've got non-native founders, last year they made up about 42%, so almost half of the ecosystem. And if you just look at that as an investment terms alone, they raised about £1.8 billion, but that number doesn't even begin to include the benefits we get from the jobs they create and the taxes they pay. So why were people concerned about access to talent when things are going so well? Well, one thing was just narrative. One of the softer things that we need to tackle here in the UK is that we've had, for the last 10 years, a very successful tech ecosystem. Many of the names up there are examples of them. But if I was to remove from that chart the companies which have non-native founders, it would look pretty lonely. And so the first thing we need to do is just make sure that the companies that are here today that have been successful get the recognition they deserve and are continued to be championed. Because a lot of the challenges that we're going to have is making sure the world thinks of us as still an open and attractive place to come and work. But there are also some very hard things. Right now, the UK has lost its competitive advantage in terms of salaries just because of the currency exchange. So at the beginning of the year, if you were a developer, you could expect to earn perhaps 20% more on average than you would today. And it's kind of wiped out the economic advantage we had over our friends in Paris and Berlin. Plus, we need to rethink the quota system. Now, obviously, the Tier 2 visa system is going to have to change, but it's going to have to change at some scale. We conservatively estimate there's about 41,000 hires made of non-natives into the UK startup ecosystem each year. And right now, there's 20,000 Tier 2 visas for every industry. And so we're going to have to change that. And we're also probably going to have to look at the process, because for an industry that's motto is, cliched motto is move fast and break things, we are going to have to radically change the way that we process visas, because right now it takes about 3 weeks to hire someone without a visa and about 16 plus weeks to hire someone with a visa. So to kick off this discussion, I think the UK is in a phenomenally lucky place because of the successes we've had, because of the ecosystem we've built, to be almost a third of the European tech ecosystem in terms of numbers of startups and the amount of capital raised. But it wouldn't take much. We reckon about 20% of the workforce would have to move in order for us to lose that position and to rebalance the way that Europe looks. So those are some of the issues that our portfolio came up with and some of the ones we want to discuss today.
That's amazing to see some hard numbers actually applied to this discussion. Matt Hancock, is the potential impact on the tech ecosystem in the UK of harder Brexit and also controlling immigration worth it for taking back control?
Well, the decision's been made and the votes happened, and there's no point in rerunning that. But we're determined to make sure that the big successes that we've seen in the UK over the past half a dozen years, decade or so, to see those continue, to retain our #1 spot, to be the most investable place. It's not just London. I thought that the research was really interesting about the growth outside of London as well, and the cities around the UK which are really starting to burgeon in terms of tech talent. There were a couple of other things I thought when you dig into the research that were striking in this area. The first is that there's a huge amount of talent in the UK, in UK tech startups, both European and from the rest of the world outside of Europe. And that shows that even with a visa system as we've had with the rest of the world, we've been able to be that global magnet for talent that we want to continue to be. And we want to continue to attract the brightest and the best from right around the world. So this isn't, you can't just see this through the European lens. You've got to see this through the lens of what is the talent we need to make sure that the UK can stay at the front.
But the government's still very much in chaos about what sort of immigration policy there will be, whether it's a talent-based visa point system, such as in Australia, that seems to kind of fall by the wayside. Where is the government standing now on how this is going to work going forward?
Well, the Prime Minister has essentially ruled out the Australian-based system precisely. And of course, there'll be a plan put in place. And as we trigger Article 50 in the new year, and then there's a 2-year process between that and leaving the EU. During that period, we are full members of the European Union. And so,
apart from not being invited to many dinners and meetings.
Actually, Axelle and I were in Brussels on Friday together, and were fully participating. And in fact, the UK remains there, making the arguments on things like data flows, as we were talking about on Friday, and on mobile roaming, where we cast essentially the casting vote to ensure that mobile roaming could go forward, so you don't get charged for roaming from.
So there's still discussions ongoing, and of course the UK remains a full member. But Axelle, Lemaire, you must be licking your lips at the prospect of taking out a good swathe of the UK startup scene, taking the Paris. I know that Paris is particularly targeting the fintech aspect of this. No?
Well, Paris and France more generally are certainly in a good position at the moment in Europe, but also at the international stage, to attract the most innovative people. But it's not only a sort of cynical strategic positioning. I think what is also important to remind here is the reasons why we want to have freedom of movement for people. First, because we consider if we belong to the European Union, it's because it was built on certain values, one of them being individual rights, another one being freedom. And that it does translate in concrete rights, such as the freedom of movement of people. That's one thing. The other thing is we're going through a massive revolution, which is digital now. Economies and societies used to be built on agriculture. And then they were built on manufacturing and what we would consider today as traditional industries. Tomorrow, they will be built on data thanks to people. And so human resources are indeed becoming the key assets, not only for startups to be competitive towards big corporates or other economic models. They are people are becoming the number one asset of companies and the new business models that they need to invent. So in this framework, yes, France wants to be one of the most attractive countries in the world for this asset. So we've, for example, launched last year the French Tech Ticket. It's a visa program to invite tech entrepreneurs to come over with a grant, seed money, with a visa for themselves and their family, and with a reserved place in a very good accelerator, such as the Station F, which will open in January and which is going to be the biggest incubator for startups in the world, so creating a real ecosystem in the heart of Paris. We've launched very recently, at the beginning of November, a program called the Passeport Talent. This is a bit more large to target innovators in general.
So have you been sending any buses to Shoreditch with come to Berlin, or come to Paris, rather? Come to Paris?
I don't think we need to do that. I think if we look at the figures, especially in the amount of capital risk that has been invested in the recent months in France, it speaks to itself. So we don't have to spend any money on advertisement on buses. We just need to look at the
Just hop on the Eurostar and off you go.
Exactly.
I want to come back to you about some more of your strategy, but James, as an investor at Balderton, you've done this research. I mean, firstly, how surprised were you when you actually looked at the research and thought, oh my God, this is, 10-15% drop? And secondly, how is it going to affect your investment strategy going forward? You're based in London right now. What are you going to do? Are you going to put in offices around continental Europe? Or how will you deploy capital? So
yeah, I mean,
what are those two things going on?
So in terms of surprises, there were positive and negative surprises. It is concerning that this industry, the tech industry, is far more reliant on migrant work and therefore, or attracting skilled talent from abroad at the moment, and therefore is more susceptible to any changes in the way we deal with talent. It was more than I was expecting. As a result, I think we need to think about how important is this community to us as an economy, and how much of a strategic priority are we going to give it when we think about policies going forward. Now, the other side of this report, there's a lot of very positive stuff. So, as Matt said, we're still very attractive to people across the world. And over the last 5-10 years, actually, successive UK governments have done a lot of good stuff to encourage startups to come here. So, hopefully, they'll be able to continue in that vein. And the other thing to mention is that, while we may, we've sort of cheekily put London, Paris, and Berlin as different sort of hubs in this report, if you look at those three hubs together as a super hub, we have as many developers as the whole of Silicon Valley and a lot of sort of upstate California between the three of us. And so if we think about the raw talent that we have in that relatively localized area, if we can continue to work together, we have the huge opportunity here to be a world leader together. In terms of how we shift our strategy, we already have people based in Berlin, we have people based in Paris. About 70-something% of our investment goes outside of the UK already. So we're pretty well balanced. But we're going to have to see what policy changes after the Article 50 is done to see if that strategic.
That means you're going to have to balance startups dealing with one set of regulatory rules in Berlin versus one set of regulatory rules in London. Is that not the case?
Well, at the moment, we've been quite fortunate because we encourage people to use some of the UK's regulatory system at the moment. And you see startups from, even Estonia, which is being championed for its e-residency, some of them do look to London now, come here because it's a cleaner place to start a company, and that's true for many other countries. So if we can continue to be world leaders at that, if we make sure that we make this a priority, then actually it could be very beneficial and we wouldn't have to change it too much. But you're right, if that does happen, then we're going to have to think about
Matt,
how we reallocate resources.
Is this going to form part of government strategy going forward, that there's still going to be continuing links between these big ecosystems?
Well, our job is to make sure that the UK is the most investable place. And so, aside from the debate around Brexit, which of course is important, there's a huge amount of other things that we can do to make the UK attractive. If you think of the £1 billion for broadband infrastructure that was in the autumn statement last week, making sure that we replicate the EIF funding, which is a big supporter of some tech startup here in the UK through the British Business Bank. Also, people come to places that they want to live. And so the UK culture scene, and London in particular, as an amazing place, one of the best cities in the whole world to live your life, is an important part of attracting talent. And so, you know, the two sides of my portfolio go hand in hand there. And in a way, post-Brexit, you know, as a Remain voter, I was worried about the impact on the economy. But over the last month or so, we've seen an increasing number of investment decisions come to the UK in a way that we've been really cheered by. You know, if you look at the Google final investment decision on its £1 billion King's Cross campus, decisions by Facebook, Microsoft, IBM, and others to invest in the UK, having taken stock after the Brexit decision, come to those decisions, and gone for the UK. So there's a whole series of other areas where we can make sure that we remain incredibly attractive as we have worked hard to do in the past.
I want to pick you up on that. By the way, front of house sound, could you turn up the monitors on the front stage, please, so that we can hear ourselves a bit better? It's all very well, but there's always been, in Britain, there's always been the sword of Damocles hanging over these tech giants. Come here, put your businesses here, and we'll be a low-tax, low-regulation environment. We're the Monaco of Europe, almost. You know, this is the issue. Google and Facebook and Apple, well, Apple in Ireland, have got away with murder over tax. And you guys constantly hold this over these tech giants, saying, you know, add a big building in London, add some more engineers, and we won't come down on you like a ton of bricks on tax. And that's really what's going on here, isn't it?
Not really. We've got a stable tax system. Of course, people need to pay their fair share of taxes, but we also want it to be a stable and predictable system. You know, Apple's decision to invest in the old Battersea power station in a really big way, which came after the Brexit vote, that was about where do we build our European HQ. It wasn't about taking staff away from anywhere else. It was about where do we build for the future. And those decisions keep coming back to the UK and to London.
Perhaps it was
and it's our job to keep working at that.
Perhaps it was also about the fact that with the plummeting pound, Apple is about to make millions and millions more money out of trading in the UK.
Sure. I mean, there is a flip side to the impact of the pound on the attractiveness of salary, and that is to make the UK a more attractive place to invest. In a way, that's that's why you have a floating exchange rate, so that when there is a big change like Brexit, some of it you see the consequences.
Axelle, Lemaire, you probably think to yourself, culture. Hello, we've got culture. We can trump. Shall we say? Oops, slip of the tongue. Any culture the UK can produce in Paris and in France. Is that part of your sell?
Creative industries and culture, yes, certainly. And we just passed an augmented tax credit for the video game industries, and we have very good companies such as Ubisoft, for example, which are French. But I think actually the elephant in the room here, you mentioned it more or less, it's Donald Trump and who voted for the Brexit. That is the real political challenge. And I think it's all very well to talk about how are we going to attract the best talents in London, but will they feel welcome by the rest of the country, and what is being done to address the future of the country as a whole and to ensure that innovation is as inclusive as possible. You mentioned the question of connectivity of territories. How much is the British government investing in?
Well, it was an additional $1 billion on top of about a $3 billion program beforehand.
Okay, so the total amount of public and private investment in France in high-speed broadband infrastructures up to 2021 is 21 billion euros.
21 billion euros.
21 billion euros. And the
quite a lot.
French plan is the only one that has been entirely and globally validated by the European Commission, because it is not considered as state aid. We're not favoring one telecommunication company rather than another one. So I believe the vision we have for the future is an inclusive innovation. That means not public policies reserved for very connected, urban, skilled, young people.
Do you have a comeback to that, Matt?
Oh yeah, the figure I gave was just the taxpayer contribution. That's a small proportion. In fact, the UK connectivity is leading in Europe at the moment, but we've got a lot of work to do to get full fibre connectivity up to speed, and that's what the new investment's going in. There was another figure in the report that was really striking, which is that the proportion of the population who are developers, and there's a page on this in the report, really interesting, because the difference across Europe is amazing. From 0.05% in Italy through to 0.33 in the UK, similar in France, and then up to Ireland, where there's twice as high proportion of the population are developers. And this speaks to Axelle's point, a really important point about making sure that the benefits spread across the whole country rather than being city-specific. And training people and giving them the skills to be able to participate in the industry both helps the benefits to spread more broadly and, of course, helps, over the long term, solve the talent problem.
This is a very good point, and of course we've seen the rise of populist politics to to try and attract people who effectively the left behinds or the just managings, as it were, as Theresa May puts it. But you've got your own problems in France with the right-wing populist movement headed by Marine Le Pen breathing down the neck of mainstream politicians. And we talk about inclusiveness and getting people into the technology industry, which is the industries of the future. But you've got your own set of problems in France, haven't you?
Yeah, clearly. I'm not sure Marine Le Pen is not mainstream politics when you look at where she comes from, but that's another question. And
well, I mean,
of
she's
course,
threatening mainstream.
We're facing challenges in terms of when you look at who supports Marine Le Pen. There are people who live in rural areas and in the suburbs, not the areas that are the mostly affected, supposedly affected by migration, but who fear about the future more generally. So our responsibility is to address the real question. We're putting 1 billion euros on the table to invest in digital education. We won't see the result tomorrow morning. We will see the result in one generation. That's in 10 years' time. We're investing in continuous training and lifelong training for 500,000 people who now are unemployed, and that's because their skills do not fill the current job market needs, because they know nothing about technology. So this is, to me, the way we can at least attempt to address these challenges.
The digital skills are incredibly important, but James, when you see the announcements by the UK government of 400 million being invested into the British Business Bank to try and make up some way the potential loss of European investment funds, the £2.5 million announced by Mayor Sadiq Khan in London, the £1 billion of infrastructure, is it, from an investor's perspective in the UK, and of course interestingly you have a continental approach, do you think it's enough that the UK is doing this? What can they do more? What's the investors' reaction to all of these initiatives?
I think all of these things are welcome, but as our report points out very clearly, the number one concern is still access to talent. And the raft of announcements that sort of Matt just brought up there are all very, very welcome, but very few of them deal specifically with our ability to both train world-class talent here in the UK and also attract global talent to the UK to come and build companies here. And I think that's what we're concerned most about is right now, I think we need to focus a lot more on not only the pipeline of talent that we have in the UK and making sure that that percentage of the population who are engineers or can work in innovative companies continues to rise, but also that because ecosystems are reliant on successes, begetting successes, that we can bring into this country companies like Facebook and Microsoft and Apple under perhaps fairer terms, but also people who've worked worked in those companies who are willing to come here and stay here to build their companies. And I think that when you mention sort of the big challenges facing France, I think making sure you invest in those skills going forward is incredibly important. And also making sure you have a narrative which makes people feel like the tech community is not a group of hipsters in Shoreditch and actually is nationwide, is strategically important to the country, does contribute to the economy. I think making sure we have that narrative in place and encouraging people to think of the tech community that way is something that we haven't quite sorted out yet post-Brexit, although I'm sure you're working hard on it.
I mean, this is the point, access to talent, making skilled migrants feel welcome in the UK. When Home Secretary Amber Rudd stood up at the Conservative Party conference and said that businesses should register foreign nationals to the UK government, that was widely rejected and absolutely rejected totally by business people. And in our survey, actually, that we've done at TechCrunch, our Brexit sentiment survey, which we published just last week, 100% of respondents said they had no support for this. And even when it was clarified that this policy wasn't going ahead, 75% said there was still no support for anything like this. How on earth is the government going to change the optics and the conversation about this when you literally shot yourself in the foot right there?
Well, we're clear that we've got to be open and welcoming to the brightest and the best from around the world. And if you think about what's happened over the last few years, we've had freedom of movement within the European Union, but outside we haven't, and we've had a fairly tight visa system. And we need to make sure that we're clearly attracting, and winning that global war for talent. So getting the systems right, the systems in place, using the best technology actually to ensure that those systems are effective. We've been doing this with visas to individual countries over the past few years, improving significantly, for instance, the visa system with China through a lot of through work on making sure that it works effectively, it works technically. And clearly we've got to get this right over the next 2 and a bit years.
I was speaking to a very quite a talented gent the other day who was thinking of coming back to the UK, having worked in the UK. He's a native US guy, talented, but had worked in the UK, and thinking actually now, post-Trump election, it's time to come back. You know what he actually called himself? He actually called himself a Trump Fuji.
Oh.
Trump Fuji. Do you think that post-Brexit that the UK is going to lean on its special relationship and attract incredible talent from Silicon Valley over here?
Well, look, it's tempting.
Get the Trump Fujis over.
It's tempting to see that this is all a competition. You can see from Axelle and I that we are both quite competitive people and competitive for wanting our countries to be the best. But actually, there's a huge amount that's mutually beneficial. London is stronger when Paris is stronger in the tech scene. It's not a zero-sum game. It's about making sure that we can find ways to enhance this amazing new technology that's been developed over the past generation for the best way to improve the lives of our citizens and all of our citizens, mitigating some of the challenges and the risks that comes with it, and doing that whilst navigating whilst navigating and making sure that we bring people with us on that journey. That is the goal, and that's what we need to try to do. And so, sure, it's always fun to see the competition between London and Paris and Berlin, particularly when we're in the lead. But ultimately, you see, I can't resist the temptation sometimes. But ultimately, this isn't a zero-sum game. And ecosystems do well when other ecosystems do well.
So you're not going to be putting in a special US tech visa?
Well, actually, we've got a tech visa that wasn't fully utilised last year. The number of spaces in it weren't fully used, so there's still headroom there.
Axelle, you had a point to make.
I completely agree that it's not a zero-sum game. I'll quote George Bernard Shaw. He said once, if I've got an apple and you've got an apple and we exchange apples, we still have one apple each. If I've got an idea, you've got an idea, and we exchange ideas, that makes 3 ideas. So yes, that's the reality of the immaterial economy and the digital economy today. But then that means if we want to be part of the game, and if we agree that it's a common game, well, play by the rules. So this is where it becomes tricky, especially when the rule is financed more globally between a certain number of countries. Take, for example, the research budget. The startups in the room might not see it, but the reason also why the UK is so good in innovation is because they're in a capacity to attract the best researchers in the world. I was in Cambridge on Saturday. I was very impressed by this tech, med tech, sort of very powerful area and corner that they're creating. But the researchers are extremely worried at the moment, because when you enter into a research contract, it's for a minimum of 5 years. If you work on artificial intelligence at the moment, you do need European grants and fundings, and startups do benefit from transfers of technologies coming from research centers. So what is going to happen if, on one hand, the UK government passes tax deals with big companies, and so the marketing politically is perfect, but on the other hand, they do not have the money to fund the long-term investments that are still needed to encourage this whole innovative economy.
Yeah.
So these are questions that are, I mean, we're asking ourselves the same questions, but I believe the answer is easier to find at the European level.
So many venture capital funds in Europe and also in the UK are actually backed by European Investment Fund, and also they have access to Horizon 2020, which is 80 billion euros. James, surely you guys must be concerned about what's going to happen to that money that literally sort of flows away like a tide ebbing out. How are you all going to be speaking to LPs and getting more?
No, I mean, look, we've
your
spoken
funds?
to our LPs and we've spoken to our portfolio to say we still believe in the European opportunity. We actually think it's stronger than ever. But I think the really important thing for us is that we can invest. Look, we're middlemen, right? We invest in companies and the entrepreneurs do all the hard work. So the important thing is that we're able to create a community which can still support and grow world-leading companies. If we're invested in those things, I'm sure that whoever wants to make money will give us money to make sure it goes to the right project. So I think that's our priority, is making sure that the ecosystem is still there and that the opportunity is still there. And then hopefully we'll be successful in supporting that. I think that's what our real focus is. And very quickly, just on your Trump point and your point about science and technology, you know, science and technology and scientific research is the pipeline that drives so much of what's great about European tech at the moment. Hillary actually had in her campaign manifesto a STEM passport, where she wanted to literally, you know, staple visas onto the world's best scientific researchers so they could come and work in the US. Now that's not going to happen anymore, I'm pretty sure, but it's something that we should be considering here instead.
Well, yeah. Would you consider a STEM passport?
Well, you know, we want the brightest and the best to be coming here. So I don't see. So it's consistent with that. But you know, the question here on research is also how do you make sure that you get the best of global research, right? So of course the European angle is very important. And we've got to work through that over the next couple of years. But ultimately, you know, research knows no boundaries, and it is part of there's a global research community who talk to each other much more than they did even 10 years ago. So we've got to take a global approach, and we've got to make a success of it globally.
Axelle, you had a point.
Well, it's just to say, I don't want to sound too negative, and Matt and myself do work together and work well, and I think we agree that we need to be able to count on ecosystems, on networks, and on people and entrepreneurs, because, you know, political time might be long,
but
these people won't. Well, let me give you a very concrete example. We launched together a Franco-British data task force, and we're trying to get the best practices in terms of using open data to add value for startups and innovative companies, and from each country, and then anything we will be able to do to help these exchanges, we'll keep doing it.
Who needs the single market when the Franco-British data entente might be coming out to save us? But finally, Matt Hancock, you know, it's breaking news today that the Supreme Court is going to be starting to rule on Article 50 and whether or not the government should take this decision to Parliament. What's your position on this issue? Do you toe the government line on this? And what do you think it's going to mean if Parliament does actually have a say in Brexit?
Well, I learnt a long time ago 2 lessons in politics. The first is don't answer hypothetical questions, and the second is agree with the Prime Minister. The referendum result was clear. There is no going back on the referendum result.
It was a knife-edge referendum, let's put it that way.
It was very clear. We're not going to have a second referendum. The result of the vote, the intent of the vote, was clear, and I think therefore the government is absolutely right on triggering Article 50. But you know, whatever happens in the Supreme Court, you can't unwind the decision when like me, you know, I voted to have the referendum. I then made clear my position, which was to remain in the referendum. But if you believe in democracy, and it's more important than ever today that we believe in democracy, then you've got to respect the result.
Well, so long as democracy wins, I'm in favour of that. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panel, Matt Hancock, Axelle Lemaire and James Wise.
Thank you.